However, we are in the confectionery aisle, and I want to just talk about having fun and being flexible. Because if you want to achieve your goal, as I always preach to my clients, it's got to be sustainable, it's got to be flexible, and it's got to be enjoyable. So it doesn't mean that you can't go out and have a little bit of chocolate or ice cream and those things that we've discussed, a little bit about the sweet treats too. Because at the end of the day, if you restrict eating, you're going to end up binging and blowing out, and it's just not a fun, enjoyable way to live. Everybody, my name's Alex and I'm a physique coach here at Rabina EMF, and welcome to the 6-week summer kickstart. And today we're in Woolworths and we're going to go through some key concepts to give you some advice and key takeaways so you can shop smarter and make sure that you get a kickstart even more to that summer physique. Okay, so when you come into a supermarket, generally the first thing that you're going to come in contact with is the whole foods, the fresh fruit and the vegetables. Now, this is probably going to make up a large percentage of what you eat. They're whole foods. So as a rule of thumb, when we look at the 80-20 principle, we want to get 80% of our food choices from whole, unprocessed foods. And the other 20% we can have a little bit of fun with. So we want to start as we mean to go on, and we want to build a foundation. So a really good recommendation that you can go by to make sure you're hitting your micronutrients, which are your vitamins and minerals, your smaller nutrients, are anywhere between 3 to 5 servings of fruit and veg a day. You don't have to go over the top, but having that will allow you to get all your vitamins and minerals, and having as much variety as you can in your nutrition will help you feel better and sort of segment the cement to the bricks in terms of the bigger nutrients, like we'll go over in a moment, which are our protein, fats, and carbohydrates. So make sure when you first come into the supermarket, have a little look around, think about what you want. A good idea is to make a bit of a list so you know that, hey, I need to get X, Y, and Z, rather than walking around aimlessly around the supermarket. So when you pop in, you'll generally see all your fresh fruit and vegetables here, and then also you'll get to your fresh meats as well and your lean cuts, which we'll go through next. Okay, so one of the major macronutrients, so macro meaning big, nutrients meaning our protein, fats, and carbohydrates, is our carbohydrate sources. Now, popular to contrary belief that they are not bad for us. Carbohydrates are there to fuel our energy source. They are the primary fuel source of the body, and when we fuel the body right, we can make sure that we aim towards a better body composition and also performance when we're in the gym. So things like good carbohydrate sources, you've got your sweet potatoes, okay? You've got your variety of white potatoes, red potatoes, and then you've also got your grains as well. So you've got your pastas, your white rice, you've got your quinoas, etc. Any of those sources are going to be great to add to supplement your carbohydrate intake on the daily. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about fiber, guys, because there's a bit of misconception around it. Now, fiber is good and we need it, but a lot of the time people are under or over consuming it. So as a general rule of thumb with fiber, going back to that recommendation I made earlier about the 3 to 5 servings of fruit and or vegetables, not necessarily both, on the lower end, that could be a more smaller individual if you're a smaller female, or a younger individual if you're a child, or if you're a bigger person, you might get up to that 5 a day. Now, this is a general rule of thumb. Now, using tracking tools like MyFitnessPal, etc., we can actually collectively check how much fiber we're getting. So as a good rule of thumb, if you want to track it, anywhere between 5 to 10 grams per 1,000 calories. So for example, if you're someone who eats between 2,000 to 3,000 calories, you want to be between 15 on the low end to 30 grams per day. So fiber is great, but if we overconsume fiber, we'll often feel bloated and we have a little bit of GI distress as well. So just keep that in mind when you're in this section and don't go over the top. Okay, so we're in the meat section and there's quite a bit of variety. We've got our lean cuts of meat, and then we've got a lot of our pre-packaged meats. So we've got things like our schnitzels, our burgers, our rissoles, etc. And we've also got things like the Jamie Oliver meals, right? Now, these meals are not necessarily bad, but if we're looking at hitting our calorie goal and conserving calories, we might find that if we're picking these pre-packaged meals, we're giving away a lot of calories, because generally with the sauces, with the marinades and the lean cuts that they use, they perhaps might have a little bit more fat in because they're not as lean as the plain cuts of meat, which you can certainly make into tastier cuts. So just be wary when you're in this section. It's not that you can't have them, but you might want to look at the leaner cuts of meats, flavor them yourself, rather than giving away calories to the more processed and pre-packaged meats, even though they're tasty and on special. Okay, so we're here in the meat section once again. I've got more of a lean cut of chicken versus the pre-packaged stuff. Now, when we're looking at a lean cut of meat, you generally won't find a nutritional label on it per se because that is the product itself. It doesn't have any added ingredients per se. However, when we've got our pre-packaged meals, which we mentioned earlier, if we actually have a look at the nutritional label here, we can see that the macronutrient contents are quite different because there's been things added. Now, if we look also in the ingredient list, the things that occur at the start are the things that are more found in larger quantities versus as we go through to the bottom, the last thing on the list will be the least part or ingredient in it. So usually we should start with the actual ingredient that it is. So in this case, it's spaghetti. So we would hope that that would be the main ingredient actually in the list. But sometimes when we read through, we can actually see, hang on, there's a lot of other additives in there, perhaps sugar alcohols or other artificial flavors and preservatives, which on a side note can upset the GI. Now, once again, it's not a bad thing, but you might want to think about getting the lean cut of meat, flavoring it yourself, and then you know exactly what's in it, you can track it, and you can feel much better when you're eating it. Okay, so to segue onto the lean meat section, when we're in looking at our cuts of meat, we've got different varieties. Now, one of the best ways to look at getting the right cut of meat, or a cut of meat that's going to be a little bit more advantageous of filling those calories with better quality, is looking at the leaner cuts. So things like your chicken breasts, okay? You've got also your tenderloins. You can get leaner cuts of beef. So looking for, say, eye fillet, rump steak, rather than the rib eyes, etc. And also you can look at turkey and pork too. Now, it's not just bespoke to the animal of which the meat comes from, it's more about the cut. So if you're not sure, you can do a quick Google search or you can look at in MyFitnessPal. But if you're looking at a leaner cut of meat, sticking to something which has less fat on it from a visual perspective, again, using common sense will always steer you in the right direction. Okay, so just a quick example of alternatives that you can make. Now, most of us like burgers, right? I know I certainly do. So if we look at things like this in the supermarket, and we've got a range of them here, if you actually look on the back, per burger, you'll actually find there can be up to 25 to 30 grams of fat per one burger patty. For example, if you wanted to make a lower calorie alternative and perhaps spend your calories more wisely on other things, or perhaps have more burgers, then you might look at a leaner cut of beef mince yourself, alternatively to a lower calorie burger option, which has a leaner cut of beef, which is only 5 grams per 100 gram, which you could make into a sizable beef patty as well. So little things like that can go a long way when you're making these recipes, and you won't really miss the fat when you add other tasty ingredients together collectively. Okay, so you've got your meat, you've got your carbohydrates, you've got your veg, etc. How do you flavor it? Because otherwise we're eating bland, and this is a really common question, and it can be a bit of an issue, especially when working with clients of, well, hey, I've got this healthy food now, quote unquote, but how do I make it taste good? And then sometimes it can go out the window because we're using really high calorie marinades, such as mayonnaise, sauces, etc. Now, when we're looking to marinate our food, if we want to do it in a way which is a little bit more calorie friendly, we want to be looking at more herbs and spices. So generally in the herbs and spices section, which we may show you in a moment, you can get something which will flavor your food without adding lots of calories. However, if you are going to choose sauces, just be mindful once again of the nutritional label and the content, because you might find that 20 grams of mayonnaise you're adding every day or to every meal is adding hundreds of calories throughout the week, and it all does add up. And once again, you can find lower calorie alternatives which still taste great, which we're going to show you in a moment. Okay, sauces, marinades, etc. Before we look at herbs, we're going to have a look at some sauces. I want to give you some recommendations. So we all love sauces. We like to flavor our food, and this is a great way to do it. But once again, it's a really, really easy way to add a lot of calories if we're not mindful of what's in the sauces. Now, some good recommendations, and this is going to come down to preference and taste, is things like your Nando's sauces are generally relatively low in calorie. Obviously, anything like that's got a fat or a cream base in it, like your Marinades, it's egg based, etc., it's probably going to have a little bit more fat in it. Doesn't mean you can't have it, just means you might be mindful of what's on the back of the label, and you might have to use a little bit less. Or perhaps, again, you might find a lower calorie alternative. Some of the things that I like to use is, I'm a bit of a fan of tomato sauce. That is more of a carbohydrate based sauce or flavoring. It generally doesn't have a lot of fat in it. So I'm not going to accumulate those calories as fast, just like we talked about before when we talked about the fat calorie range versus the protein and carb calorie range. Things that we can use as well, depending on your preference. If you're someone that likes spicy sort of flavors and tastes, Tabasco is really good. It doesn't add a lot of calories, but it does pack a lot of punch. Same thing with the sriracha as well, which is an overseas sauce there. And also we've got things like your Byron Bay chili, and believe it or not, your Sweet Baby Ray's really one of my favorites and packs a lot of flavor, great for marinating your meats. But once again, guys, it comes down to your preference. Be mindful, have a look through when you're shopping, think about what you like, and make sure you tailor it bespoke to your goals. Okay, so another good way to flavor your foods, and one that I really like, is marinades, etc. You've got things also like coconut milk, peeled tomatoes, you've got a couple of canned flavorings as well. Now, when you're looking to add these flavorings, instead of, for example, using full-fat coconut cream, you might go to coconut milk, and then also you've got light coconut milk. If you look at the difference in fat content, it's quite large, and it does add up. So again, you're still getting the flavor, just not all with the extra calories that you necessarily need. So this is a really good alternative. I really like this in a green curry or a curry variation, which is something that, again, is really easy to put together. We've also got things like your peeled tomatoes as well, or your tomato-based sauces, which are just more on the plainer side. Again, accompanied with the nice lean meats and the herbs and spices, they can make for flavorsome dishes that are really easy, fast, and tasty to prepare. Okay, let's talk herbs and spices. So we've got a lot of herbs and a lot of spices, and once again, this is going to come down to your preference in terms of taste. But generally, they're a really good way to add a lot of flavor, okay, and make things a lot more palatable in your meals, whether it's lean meats, etc., and marinating and basting those, whether it's just adding them to a dish for a little bit more flair and spice. Just be sure as well though, when you go around, have a little look through, because some of them are packed with a lot of sodium or a lot of processed things. So you generally want to stick to your more basic herbs and spices. Another thing as well that's good to know is looking at your sea salts and also your peppers. Sea salt and pepper, one of the simplest ways to add flavor to your food. Now, contrary to popular belief, sodium is not necessarily bad in adequate quantities. So if you're someone who's not eating a lot of processed foods, generally you want to add some salt to your food, okay? The sodium in the body is really important to transport the nutrients around and also aid performance in and out of the gym. So just keep that in mind when you're looking through this section, and again, a really simple and effective way to flavor your food. Okay, so we've talked about protein, we've talked a little bit about carbohydrates, we've talked about fruit and veg. Now let's talk about fats, a very important nutrient in the body. However, really easy to consume. So for carbohydrate and protein, for every 1 gram, there is generally 4 calories. And in fats, it's 9 calories, so it's almost double. And fats, they taste really nice, right? They're very, what we call, palatable. So they add up a lot faster. So we generally don't have as high an intake. When we're looking at getting our fats in, it's really easy to have things like your almonds or your nuts in any sort of way that you like them. You might be a macadamia person, etc. And it's easy to just snack on them. They're very moreish. So what we need to keep in mind of, although these are great sources of fats, we just got to watch our intake a little bit as well and be mindful throughout the day. Another really good source of fats are your oils. So for example, you might be someone who likes coconut oil or olive oil. Or you might go more to your nut butters like your peanut butter or your almond butters as well. So these things here are generally going to cover your fats as well as the traces that are found in the other foods, like your leaner cuts of meat or perhaps your fattier cuts, depending on what you have. Also, when we're looking at protein and fats, you might find that you're someone who eats a lot of eggs, which is a really great and affordable choice of protein and good fats. And once again, you're going to get that combination in there as well. Okay, some more carbohydrate sources that you can use. Pasta often gets demonized in the world of dieting, and it shouldn't be, because pasta is a really good source of carbohydrates, although yes, it is a little bit more calorically dense, by meaning when we eat it, or when we eat pasta, it generally contains a lot of calories and it can add up quite fast because of the calorie content or the carbohydrate content within the actual pasta itself. Now, conversely, also rice, depending on the grain that you choose as well, can be very dense. So when we're looking at rice, it can also be quite dense, but depending on the grain that you choose as well. So something like a lighter grain, like a basmati or a jasmine rice, can be great to add some good source of carbohydrates to your nutrition regime. Rice is usually really good for digesting too on the GI tract. It sits really well, and once again, it's a nice accompaniment to any of your meat dishes as well, and your marinades and sauces. Okay. So if you're anything like me, you've probably got a sweet tooth. And it doesn't mean that you can't eat the foods that you really crave, it just means that you have to be a little bit mindful, and perhaps you can't have as much as you want of these foods, like a whole tub of ice cream. However, when we're looking at foods that we can still eat, like ice creams and also the more high calorie goods, we want to look at lower calorie alternatives. So for example, one of my favorites is the Peter's Light and Creamy. If you look at it versus a normal ice cream or an ice cream which has not been reduced in fat, it's a lot lower calorie and it actually really still tastes good. And it's not got any additives as well. So it's not trying to replace anything too greatly that it's missing. Now conversely, you've probably heard of things like Halo Top, etc. Now those ice creams are not necessarily bad, but again they are filled with a lot of what we call sugar alcohols, which create that sweetness and try and fill the void and gaps of anything that's not met with the normal nutrients. So just be mindful when you're eating those foods that the calories might be a little bit off, and it might not sit as good in the stomach. You've also got some other alternatives that will pan through for you, like your Skinny Cows, and believe it or not, Ben & Jerry's have actually made a lighten up version, which to be fair is pretty calorie friendly and will sit a lot better on your stomach and still give you that fix for that craving that you have too. Okay, so when we're talking about protein, it's probably a good idea to add in the Greek yogurts for the dairy fans in here, like myself. It's a really, really quick, convenient and tasty way to get your protein in again, and it's a lower fat alternative, generally lower carbohydrate as well, and you can add it to a lot of your meals. So for example, you've got things like Chobani, which is one of my personal favorite, and they've also got a new one called Chobani Fit, which is even lower in carbohydrates and higher in protein. And conversely, you've got things like Yo Pros, and there's a couple of other brands as well that similarly align with these things too. So don't be afraid, again, have a look at the nutrition label, add these into your nutrition regime. They're quick, they're easy, they're tasty, and they're usually on special. Okay, let's address a really popular topic, and that's the carbonated drinks, so your sodas, etc. Again, a really, really easy way to get in a lot of calories and a lot of sugar, a lot of carbohydrates without really knowing. So again, a really nice alternative, okay, the basic thing, nice and easy, is to go for your diet version, so a reduced sugar content. Now I know that they might not taste the same, but still you can get your fix until your body gets used to the change, etc. However, I wouldn't go over the top, and I'd only recommend a maximum of 2 or 3 a day, if that, because you've also got to watch, if you are having something like Coca-Cola, the caffeine content in it as well. So once again, have a little look through your aisle. There's a lot of alternatives with your diet sodas and your drinks, and you might find that you can get something which still packs a lot of flavor without all the calories. Okay. So guys, just to summarize some key takeaways. So when you're coming into the supermarket, if you want to save money, have a list, okay? Be prepared, otherwise you're going to wander aimlessly. And another little tip as well, you never want to go shopping when you're hungry, because you're generally going to put more things that you're craving into that basket or into that trolley that you just don't need. And also, to be quite honest, a lot of the things in the supermarket, guys, you don't really need it all. The basic things which we've gone over today should be the main components of your nutrition, and then again, that 20% have a little bit of fun with, but it's the 80% of that quality that you want. Now, we don't necessarily have things like clean and dirty and unhealthy and healthy and good and bad, etc. Now, they're all languages and terminologies, but generally we want to think about it as a more holistic approach. So like we've talked about today, getting the balance, looking at more whole foods, things that are rich in vitamins and minerals. Getting that, again, 80% will do most of the work and it will fill any gaps. However, we are in the confectionery aisle, and I want to just talk about having fun and being flexible. Because if you want to achieve your goal, as I always preach to my clients, it's got to be sustainable, it's got to be flexible, and it's got to be enjoyable. So it doesn't mean that you can't go out and have a little bit of chocolate or ice cream and those things that we've discussed, a little bit about the sweet treats too. Because at the end of the day, if you restrict eating, you're going to end up binging and blowing out, and it's just not a fun, enjoyable way to live. So once again, it's all right to come down this aisle and grab some things, but once again, just be mindful of your goals and make sure you're checking those boxes and hitting your minimums. Guys, if you give the body what it needs and you do the basics, it really isn't hard. And for anyone who wants any more information or perhaps has any queries or qualms, please feel free to contact us here at EMF or even myself, and I'll make sure I put you right and put things into context in a simple and effective way.